Harry Houdini was a personality invented by a very ambitious young man named Erik Weisz.
When he was 30 years old, Houdini lies about where he was born in his own diary.
What's the first mystery of Houdini? And it starts with his birth. Houdini was born in Budapest, Hungary on March 24th, 1874. Yet his diary says Harry Houdini, born April 6, Appleton, Wisconsin.
Houdini absolutely knew he was born in Budapest, March 24th, 1874. He knew he was 4 years old when he came to the US, so the question is why?
So Houdini was born Erik Weisz, and no one exactly knows why the family would move to Appleton. The legend that Houdini apparently would always tell was that his father got in a duel with some member of the Hungarian royal family and ended up killing him and had to flee to America.
What is known for sure is that Erik's father has a respectable position waiting for him in Appleton.
They had a number of Jewish families, so they needed a rabbi, and that's what his father, Rabbi Weisz, did.
He came of consciousness in this idyllic small town where his father is an honored man. There's beautiful fields, there's creeks to swim in. It is the American ideal, and that's the world Erik Weisz comes to know.
Though life is initially good for the Weisz family, circumstances soon take a turn for the worse.
When Erik was not very old, they fired his father as the rabbi, and they left Appleton for Milwaukee, and things took a bad turn. They lived in poverty at that point. They lived very poorly, and it was a time that he wouldn't even recount. He wouldn't talk about his time in Milwaukee because it was so painful.
Schooling falls out of the picture, and he goes right to work. He understands very early, I've got to help. I've got to help support this family.
He went out and did whatever it took when food needed to be on the table, from selling flowers to shining shoes to selling papers or being a messenger boy.
Work became all important, and he was a workaholic his whole life.
It probably gave him that drive, that grit, and he was determined to make himself into something. But that lack of education was going to go on to haunt him. To help his son escape the harsh realities of the poverty they were living in now, Mayor Weisz took his son to see a magic show. And there's a particular trick that Houdini remembered throughout the rest of his life, in fact.
He saw Dr. Lin, who was a famous magician, and he did an effect called palagenesia, where it appeared as though he took a knife and cut the limbs off a living person and then restored them.
To a young, clearly imaginative young boy, seeing somebody perform this incredibly dark and macabre act, it would have just been captivating. It's going to fire his imagination. It's going to be the thing that he's talking about and will remember for the rest of his life.
In one of the newly released diary entries, Houdini recounts the gruesome act. I saw Dr. Lin do it 30 years ago when I was 10 years of age in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He pretended to use chloroform, and at the time, I really believed that the man's arm, leg, and head were cut off.
I think Dr. Lin's palagenesia might have been quite formative for Houdini. My own experience is when I was a kid, I watched The Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock, and ever since, I've wanted to do things that have to do with life and death and creepy stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if Houdini said, I want to do that.
After Milwaukee, Mayor Weisz moved the family to New York City to look for work. And it was almost as though that was the place where the Houdini persona started to take shape in young Erik.
The young Houdini's life in New York was what really opened up the possibilities to him. It was not until he got to Manhattan that I think he suddenly looked up and saw the potential of America and of making his name there.
He becomes very, very interested in athletics. That really is a natural for him. For his competitive nature, for his love of physical fitness, he becomes a boxer, he becomes a champion runner. His drive was more like an athlete's drive than an entertainer's. And it really starts here in New York.
The great thing about athletics is, if you win that race, you are the best. You are number one. And they give you a little medal to prove it.
I think that photograph of Houdini with all the medals is very telling of his earnest personality and desire for acceptance and success, and showing people that he was not just another one of these nameless, faceless immigrants running around the city.
On closer examination, some of them appear to be genuine medals, and some of them are sort of milk bottle caps that he's fashioned into medals.
So not only did he have the medals that he'd earned, and there were quite a few of those, he'd added a couple. He was a natural exaggerator.
Clearly, Houdini wanted to be bigger than life, and he would do anything towards that end.
In 1889, a chance discovery changes everything.
So the young Erik in New York City stumbled across a book by Robert-Houdin, the memoirs of Robert-Houdin, and that seems to be a real turning point for him. It was about a fully rounded character, and that's what I think inspired him to create his own.
Robert-Houdin is known as the father of modern magic.
He was one of the first people to ever levitate another human being. And Robert-Houdin levitated his little son, and he called it the ethereal suspension. And people believed it. Robert-Houdin said that a magician is an actor playing the part of someone with real power.
Houdini took this on board, I think, and realized that he had to inhabit the character 100%. He had to be the character he created. Now that he'd got the blueprint for the persona, what he needed was a name for it.
Erik Weisz gets a job at H. Richter's & Sons tie factory. While he's working there, he meets a friend, Jacob Hyman. And the story goes that it was Jacob who said, if you take the name Houdin and add an I onto the end, in French, that means like Houdin.
And there it was. There it was. The name that you can never forget. One of the reasons people say his name so often is because it comes out so well. Houdini. Houdini.
Erik Weisz made his own destiny in becoming Houdini, and that was kind of the first stage in his transformation.
Erik Weisz was the boy who worked in a tie shop, and Houdini was the result of his decision that he was going to express himself. He wasn't Erik Weisz, he was Houdini.
Erik Weisz now has a blueprint to change his life. He decides to commit himself to the character of Houdini completely, even if that means leaving his true past and his real birthplace behind.
He always claimed that he was an American because I think he felt like he was a product of this new America. In his own words, he says, Robert-Houdin became my hero and guide. This book became my gospel. It gave him a path to fame and fortune and respectability through magic.